The word breath is synonymous with spirit or life force in several ancient languages. Prana in Sanskrit, chi in Chinese, spir in Latin, which is where we get spirit, as well as inspiration when something fills us in a profound way. We respire throughout the day, and when we exhale for the last time, we expire. To conspire actually means to breathe together. So let's conspire for a moment. Breathe with me. Adults breathe about 13 to 15 times a minute, which comes out to over 20,000 times a day. That's about 2,000 gallons, which is enough to fill a swimming pool. And it's also about 30 pounds of air, if you can get your mind around that. So if you only drink the 8 ounce or the 8 recommended glasses of water a day, that's about 4 pounds. And most of us eat a lot less food, which means that the air you breathe is your single largest environmental exposure by at least 7-fold. Now, the late, great author and philosopher David Foster Wallace told a story about 2 young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming in the other direction, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" The 2 young fish swim on for a bit, and eventually one looks at the other and says, "What the hell is water?" See, of the 4 basic human needs, air, water, food, and shelter, air is often an afterthought. But air is our water. And it's the one thing we can live without for the shortest period of time. So why the blind spot? Well, there's a few reasons. First of all, breathing is usually effortless and largely unconscious. But also the law of familiarity states that anything you're exposed to long enough, you'll eventually take for granted. So can you think of anything that you're exposed to more than air? Breathing wasn't always easy for me. When I was 4 years old, I was falsely diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. What I was actually suffering from was asthma compounded by pneumonia, and I was allergic to nearly everything in my environment: grass, wheat, corn, eggs, dogs, cats, even cotton. When my folks split up, I moved out of my childhood home, and all of my symptoms went away. I never had to use an inhaler again, and I'm no longer allergic to anything. It was chalked up to adolescent remission, like my grandfather who grew out of his asthma. And I wouldn't think about it again for over a decade. But then one day I read an article about a man who had gotten sick, had developed adult onset asthma, and developed allergies to nearly everything, and he blamed the mold in the hotel where he worked. Thinking back, we had a damp, musty basement, and I still remember that heavy feeling, like a weight on my chest whenever I was down there. And I always felt better when I was outside. And it was like a light bulb went on. Suddenly all the pieces of the puzzle came together for me. And I became obsessed with the idea that the buildings that we live and work in can make you sick. That was a new concept for me. And it propelled me to learn everything I could about how buildings impact our health. Now, that was over 20 years ago. And through my company, Got Mold, I've performed thousands of sick building investigations, solving many medical mysteries along the way, helping to restore health and peace of mind to hundreds of families. But mold inspections are expensive, cost prohibitive for most. So in recent years, I've dedicated myself to democratizing the healthy home through the creation of at-home mold test kits and raising awareness through talks like this. So according to Lawrence Berkeley Labs, about half of all American homes have a mold or moisture problem of significance. And we spend about 90% of our time indoors, now mostly in our homes, rebreathing the same air 20,000 times a day. And this has come with consequences. Asthma is now an epidemic affecting 42 million Americans. And according to EPA and Berkeley Labs, about a quarter of those cases are mold and dampness related. Mayo Clinic has implicated mold in nearly all cases of chronic sinusitis, affecting 37 million. But it's more than just respiratory illness. Mold and poor indoor air quality impact almost every area of health. A large Brown University study found a strong correlation between mold and dampness indoors and depression. And this one really hit home for me. My own mother committed suicide in the moldy home that I grew up in just 2 years after I moved out. Now, no one really knows what happened there, and mental illness is complex. She was also an alcoholic, but I couldn't help but wonder if this was a factor. By some estimates, mold impacts over 100 million Americans every year. But it's also more than mold. It's also chemicals known as VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, and hypersanitization. But for the sake of brevity, we're going to focus on mold. So how did we get here? Well, before World War II, homes were built to last, made mostly of brick, stone, plaster, and old-growth timber. They were hard to heat and cool for sure, but they had a low chemical load, they had lots of ventilation, and they were inherently mold resistant. Then, demand from the baby boomers created the need for faster and cheaper building materials, like drywall, an ideal growth medium for mold. And recent research has shown that nearly all drywall comes pre-inoculated with mold spores. So we now build self-composting buildings. Just add water. I mean, even the dumbest of the three little pigs didn't build this house out of paper, but we do at scale. Fast forward to the 1970s. During the fuel crisis, we began to tighten up our buildings to save energy. Stuffing our walls with fluffy insulation, so now when water gets in the walls, they don't dry. Also in the process, eliminating nearly all air exchange, and then simultaneously introducing untold number of toxic chemicals into our house in the form of paints, finishes, furnishings, cleaning products, and personal care products. We now have a nation of airtight papier-mâché chemical boxes that get moldy very quickly when they get wet. So is it any wonder that we have skyrocketing rates of asthma, allergies, autoimmune disease, cancers, not to mention depression and anxiety? I mean, our homes were built and designed to protect us from the elements, to keep us safe, right? But over time, the opposite has occurred. It's like the proverbial boiling frog. It started off slow at first, but it has reached a boiling point. But there is good news. There is good news. Oliver Wendell said that a mind stretched by a new idea never regains its original dimensions. And now you are more aware than most. I hope you can't unsee this. Also, unlike the outdoor environment where you and I as individuals can do almost nothing about the air quality, et cetera, the indoor environment is an area where we have enormous potential for control if we choose to exercise it. And it all begins with awareness. So what can you do? Well, you must be vigilant about mold, which is all about moisture control. Even a small leak can sink a big ship. So here's a simple acronym to help you remember the basics. H.O.M.E. H is for humidity control. We want to keep our relative humidity between 40 and 60% with an ideal target at 45%. So you'll use digital humidity gauges throughout your house and dehumidifiers when necessary. O is for optimizing ventilation. So use your exhaust vents in your bathrooms and kitchens especially, but also open your windows whenever the weather allows. You might consider installing an air exchange system to help moisture buildup, but they're also very, very helpful with VOCs. M is for moisture control. You need to maintain your building to prevent moisture intrusion. You also want to keep your eyes peeled for leaks, drips, condensation. Just like that wet towel in your gym bag, you only have 24 to 48 hours to respond to a moisture problem before it becomes a mold problem. And so also choose materials, waterproof materials and mold-resistant materials in moisture-prone areas like basements and bathrooms. And E is for early detection. If you see something, smell something, or feel something, do something. So keep your eyes peeled for any signs of moisture. So that's stains, discoloration, peeling paint. Also, of course, visible mold. The musty smell is often the first clue, but it's also a health hazard. Kids exposed to the musty odor have double the risk of developing asthma. And recent research, recent animal studies, has shown that the musty odor is neurotoxic, which means that any mold growth of significance can lead to mold toxicity regardless of the species, not just the handful of molds that produce mycotoxins. Now, of course, if you're feeling symptoms that seem to get better when you leave the building, that's a clear indicator that you need to take some action. So in those cases, you're going to want to get your air tested or possibly engage the services of an indoor environmental consultant who will guide you through the process. So let me leave you with this thought. Most people think about buildings as these static boxes where we live, work, and store our stuff. More and more, I think about them as an extension of your immune system, like an exoskin or an exoskeleton. You know, we're a little bit like hermit crabs in the sense that we don't do very well without our shell. Your relationship with your home may very well be the most important one you have in terms of your health and longevity. So take the time to get to know it and make the necessary investments. 20 years ago, I was obsessed. I was captivated by the idea that that our homes can make us sick. But what I've learned is that our homes can also heal. But it's dependent upon the efforts you make, and it impacts every breath you take. Thank you.